Good day, everybody. Patrick here. Um, Today we are going to talk about signposting language. Signposting language. And you can see here on the screen, I'm on a website uh, called IELTS Buddy, and that's obviously a website dedicated uh, to prepare the students for IELTS exams. But this signposting language is not only important for IELTS, it's important for any exam, any writing uh, text, any writing piece that you are producing. Um, but mainly, we hear about signposting when we give presentations or lectures. Okay, presentations or lectures. When you are giving a lecture or giving a presentation to a group of people, an audience, um, it's very important to use signposting language. And let me explain what signposting language is. So, signposting, anyway, is what you do to make sure that the listener knows what you are talking about and what will you be talking about. Imagine a little child, right? Imagine, well, actually, imagine a father or a mother or an adult holding the hand of a child while walking in the street. If you don't hold the child's hand, the child might get lost. And so just understanding that is very important for you because there's a connection between this image of you holding as an adult, you holding the hand of a child, so the child will not get lost. Strong connection between this image and that of a presenter or a lecturer using signpost, right, to help the audience stay attentive and not get lost. If you don't use signposting language, your audience might just get lost and you cannot find them again. Then you end up talking and talking and talking, and they are completely sleeping. Okay? They probably doze off. They'll take a nap. All right? And they will probably lose interest. They lose interest. And you cannot afford that when you are giving a talk, when you are delivering a presentation or a lecture of any kind. You cannot take that risk. You need to make sure that your audience is always attentive. That means paying attention and listening to you and is aware, your audience is aware of what you are going to talk about, what you just talked about, and what will you be talking about. Okay? All these things are very important, and that's what signposting language is. Okay? So, this article here, and I'm going to include the link to the article on the screen. It's good for you to read it. Don't worry that it's saying that this is important for IELTS. Well, it's not only important for IELTS, it's important for any talk that you give. And even it's important in writing and in speaking, not only in speaking. Okay? So, but I would like to walk you through some of the main sentences or main phrases that you can use when you are delivering a presentation about anything. All right? So pay attention as we go through the list because I'm going to give you some examples as well. We're going to pick a topic um, for the presentation, and I'm going to be using the signposting language with that topic. All right? So I'm not going to give you a presentation about this topic, but I'm going to use this topic as an example when I read the phrases for you, the signposting language. Okay? So, um, like anything else in English, in the academic world, like anything else, we have an introduction, we have a body, and we have a conclusion. Presentations are not different. Okay, presentations and lectures um, have the same characteristics. They have an introduction, they have a body, and they have a conclusion. So the first thing that you do when you actually open up a presentation, when you start a presentation, the first thing you do is you introduce the topic of your presentation. Okay? So, in other words, for example, you say, today we're going to talk about, see, talk is the key word. Today we're going to talk about, and now because you have about, you need to actually have a noun after it. You cannot use a verb. You can use a gerund, or you can use a noun, any noun, but you have to use a noun. So, for example, you can say, today we're going to talk about the greatest challenges of international students studying in Australia. Here you go. That's a topic, right? So I opened my presentation. The first thing I did, I introduced the topic to my audience. I'm telling my audience what the topic of the presentation is going to be. I can say the topic of today's lecture is, so now I need to add after is, the topic of today's lecture is the struggles of international students in Australia. Okay, so I'm not using only the word challenges, I'm also using the word struggles, just to show you that you can find synonyms, and you have to use synonyms. You cannot keep repeating the same word throughout the presentation. You have to use synonyms. There are many ways to say the same idea or the same concept. So we say the topic of today's lecture is the challenges or the struggles of international students in Australia. Or this morning we're going to take a look at, this morning we're going to take a look at, we're going to take a look at, and then now you need to use a noun again because you have at. Okay, you have at. At is a preposition. Look at, looking at is a phrasal verb. So look at, look at. And now I have to say a noun. I have to use a noun. So I can say this morning we're going to take a look at some of the challenges faced by international students in Australia. Okay? So you can see how I change how I word my topic. There's not only one way to articulate the topic. You can use many different ways to express the same thought, to express the same topic. Okay, next. Today I'll be talking about, or I'll be discussing, today I'll be discussing, what are you going to be discussing? Let's say, today I'll be talking about or discussing the challenges that international students encounter in Australia. Ah, this time I didn't say face. I said encounter. Encounter. That means face. When you face a problem, you encounter a problem. You encounter a problem. You encounter a problem. Okay? So, talking about discussing, same meaning. You can say either. Next, what I'm going to talk about today, what I'm going to be talking about today, do you see how I say going to, I say gonna? It's okay to use gonna. I don't encourage you to use gonna in academic uh, talks, right? It's better not to use that kind of language, but it's fine. I heard it from professors, I heard it from teachers. People use it without actually being conscious of it. So I would not think it's a big deal, right? So what I'm going to be talking about today is the many challenges international students face in Australia and how they can overcome them. Here you go. Now you are actually adding to that. You're not only are you going to talk about the challenges, you're also going to be touching on or mentioning some of the solutions to those challenges or problems. The purpose of today's lecture is um, is to now we have two here, right? We have two. So the purpose of today's lecture is to, okay, so if I say is to, I have to use a verb now after to. Okay? The purpose of today's lecture is to shed light on some of the difficulties international students face in Australia. When you shed light on something, you are providing more information about something. So that means something is not very, very clear to people. Maybe there's darkness about it. That's why shed light on. If you shed light on, that means maybe this area does not receive a lot of attention. This area does not receive a lot of attention, and therefore you are shedding light. You are providing more information, more knowledge about the topic. The subject or the topic of my talk is, so now you're about to simply read the title of the topic. What is the title of the presentation and the subtitle? Title and subtitle. And I would say that can be something like the subject or the topic of my talk is International Students Arduous. That means it takes a lot of effort and a lot of hard work. Okay, so International Students Arduous Journey in Australia. And that's the topic of your presentation. The first thing you do is you introduce your topic to your audience so they know why they are sitting there listening to you. What are you about to speak about? What are you about to discuss with them? Okay? What are you about to shed light on? That's the main thing. Okay, and then the next stage of your presentation should be telling your audience what the structure of your talk is going to be. What the structure of the presentation is going to be. Okay, so that means now you're going to start with something like, in today's lecture, I'm going to cover 3 points. But we're not only talking about points, we are talking about something more specific in this topic. We're talking about challenges that international students encounter while studying in Australia. So, I'm not going to say points, I'm going to say 3 challenges, and maybe I might add something. So, in today's lecture, I'm going to cover 3 great challenges international students face or encounter or struggle to overcome. All right, see, there are different ways to do it. All right, so you can say I'm going to divide this talk into three parts. Okay, I'm going to divide this talk into three parts. And then you can say, and each part will be looking at a difficult challenge. Okay, now, so what you did here, you actually divided. That means you split, you divided, you you cut your presentation into three parts. You are telling the audience to expect hearing about three different points, three different areas, three different challenges, three different problems. You can call them whatever you want. But now there is that structure in the audience's head that they know what to expect. They have an idea. You introduce the topic first, and now you are telling them that they're going to hear three challenges. They're going to hear about three challenges, or three solutions, or three areas, or whatever that may be. Okay? The important thing is you are being clear about what the structure looks like in this presentation. Next, first we'll look at, so you can say first, and then, and finally. So this way you are creating that structure in your audience's head. That's very important. Okay, so you can say first we'll look um, at culture shock. That's one challenge that international students face. So you say first we'll look at culture shock. Then we'll go on to talk about the difficulties of learning a foreign language and their impact on the student's experience. And finally, I'll touch on the financial problems and try to offer some solutions to all three challenges. So, okay, so now I'm also adding that I will give you an idea of what some of the solutions might be to your problems. Okay, but so now the audience knows that they expect to hear about the first problem, the second problem, and the third problem. There are only three problems, so they are ready to hear about three, not four, not five, but they are ready to hear about three problems, and they're waiting to hear about the challenges and the solutions at the end that you're going to recommend to international students so they can overcome those challenges. Okay? All right. So now we've just covered, right, how you explain the structure of your presentation to your audience. Okay, so now we've covered how you can explain the structure of your presentation to your audience. Now I'd like to move on to the phrases or the sentences that we use to introduce our first section. Okay, so we can start by, let's start by talking about. Let's start by talking about. Remember, if you have about, so that's a preposition. If you have about, then you have to use a noun after it. So you can say something like, let's start by talking about culture shock. If you remember, I said before when I introduced, or when I talked about the structure of the presentation, I said that I'll be dividing my talk into three parts or three challenges. Okay? And then now it's time to introduce what is the first point. And the first point is culture shock. So I'll say, let's start by talking about culture shock. Let's start by talking about culture shock. Or, to begin, okay, so what do I say? To begin, let me explain what a culture shock actually is. So I started my first section by defining the key term. of my presentation. The key term, one of the key terms is culture shock because it's one of the challenges. So now, in other words, I'm actually explaining the topic sentence. The topic sentence. The key word of the first section is culture shock. So there is no better way to start your section, your first section, than defining the key term of that section or defining the key topic of that section, which is culture shock. So to begin, let me explain what a culture shock actually is. Or you can say, firstly, I'd like to define the term culture shock. Firstly, I'd like to define, I would like, I'd like to define the term culture shock, which again is very important because you are defining the key term of your topic. Or you can say, I'll start with culture shock. Simple. I'll start with culture shock. Or you can say, the first challenge, which I'm certain many of you are familiar with. I mean, it depends who your audience is. Not all audiences are familiar with your topic. So you need to know your audience. When you are giving a presentation, you need to know who you are giving your presentation to. Who are you delivering your presentation to? How much does your audience know about the topic? What is the level of their knowledge of the topic? How aware of the topic are they? So you need to know your audience, but let's assume that your audience knows something about it, okay? So we'll say the first challenge, which I'm certain, that means I'm sure, the first challenge, which I'm certain many of you are familiar with, is culture shock. Okay, so next is, we're going to talk about finishing a section. All right, so now we've just seen how we introduce the first section. Okay, how you introduce your first section. But now we're going to look at how you finish a section. So just like I used the same strategy myself. I said, now you've seen, I've talked about, we've looked at, okay? We've looked at, for example, we've looked at culture shock and its impact on the students' experience in Australia. All right? Or I've talked about culture shock and its impact on the students' experience in Australia. So that's how you finish a section, right? You are finishing, you're closing a section and you're about to open another. Okay? And then when you open another, you go back to, secondly or thirdly. Okay? And I'm going to show you now what other phrases you can use. So now you can say, let's move on to. Let's move on to. Okay? Let's move on to. And what can I say? Let's move on to the problems associated with the students' English language skills. So remember, we started with culture shock. Now we're going to continue and we're going to talk about the second challenge. So what I said was, let's move on to the problems associated with the students' English language skills. So that's the second issue. That's the second problem. Or you can say, now let's turn to. Instead of saying, let's move on to, you can say, now let's turn to. Turn to. Let's turn to. Let's turn to the problems associated with the students' English language skills. If you don't want to say that, you can say, and I'd now like to talk about, simply, okay? You can say, and I'd now like to talk about problems associated with the students' English language skills. I'm just repeating the same phrase or the same sentence here. the key thing is to show you the signposting language that is essential, for you to use in a presentation or any academic talk. Okay. Um, you can say something like the next or second, because you said the first thing I'm going to talk about, in the previous section. You said the first thing I'm going to talk about is culture shock. Now you say uh, the second thing or the next challenge, the second challenge, and then what can you say? Yeah, well, the second challenge or the second greatest challenge affecting the experience of international students in Australia is the English language skills. Okay? If you don't like saying that, you can say the next issue or the next area or the next challenge I'd like to focus on is, okay? So the next area, the next challenge I'd like to focus on is learning English as a second language and the challenges that it poses to international students. So here you go. There are several ways how to express the same thought, the same idea. There are many words you can use to articulate that, okay? All right. So now we have looked at how you start a new section, okay? And finally, I'd like to show you some of the phrases, and those are very common phrases. Some of the phrases we use, right, to finish our talk, to that's for our conclusion. All right, because I did say before that your introduction has a body and a conclusion. Now that's a conclusion, and I want to show you some of the phrases we use to conclude our presentation, to sum up our presentation, to wrap up. We say wrap up our presentation. All right, wrap up. That means finish up. Okay, so you can say to sum up. We have looked at the three greatest challenges that international students struggle with. Okay, for example, you can say, so it is clear from what we have discussed today that blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'd like now to recap. What does recap mean? What does recap mean? When you recap, that means you sum up. You conclude, not conclude, you summarize. All right? Summarize. You are summarizing. So within a minute or two, you need to cover again, repeat the three challenges that you've spoken about throughout the presentation. Now it's time to summarize that, to recap. So you just go over it again very quickly. Okay? Or you can say, let's summarize briefly what we've looked at. Let's summarize briefly what we've looked at, right? Or you can say, in conclusion, okay? In conclusion, there are three big challenges that international students encounter in Australia. And as we've discussed, those are A, B, and C, and the best way to handle them is by doing A, B, and C. The main goal of using signposting language is to really keep the audience attentive, to keep your audience aware of everything that you're saying. Okay, you are giving them directions. You are telling them, hey, don't get lost. Follow me. I'm here. I'm showing you the way. I'm telling you what I'm talking about. I'm telling you what the topic is. I'm introducing to you what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. I'm going to tell you when I start a new section. I'm going to tell you when I'm when I finished a section, I'm going to tell you when I'm moving on to a new section, and I'm going to summarize all the points that I have made in this presentation to you. So if you do that, then your audience will enjoy listening to you because they are involved in the presentation. They know where you're going every step along the way. You are holding their hands and you are constantly reassuring them that you are not going too fast, that you are going to make sure that they know where you are at every turn, every section. Okay? So, I cannot stress enough how important it is to use signposting language. Okay? So, make sure that you practice those, use them in your presentations, use them in your lectures, use them in any talk that you give in an academic setting, and you can probably use a lot of them in your writing as well. When you write an essay, an opinion essay, you have to express your own opinion. And so people or the readers would be very, very glad to see that you are telling them what you're going to be talking about in this essay. What is the topic of the essay? How is the essay structured? How many parts in the essay? How many paragraphs that is? And how many key points? How many challenges? How many causes? How many issues? How many solutions? Etc. etc. And then they want to know that you are going to summarize all the points at the end. Okay, so okay, that's what I wanted to say today. That's my talk. That's what the lesson is all about. It's about signposting language. Focus on signposting this week is very important for your essay writing and for your presentation preparation. Make sure you do your job. And if you have any questions, you can either ask me or you can ask your teacher. Thank you very much and have a great day.